It's our purpose to bring to bear the principle of common sense and rational discussion to the issues of our day. America was created at a time of great turmoil, tremendous disagreements, anger, hatred. There was a book written in 1776 that guided much of the discipline of thinking that brought us to the discovery of our freedoms, of our God-given freedoms. It was Thomas Paine's Common Sense, written in 1776, one of the first American bestsellers, in which Thomas Paine explained by rational principles the reason why these small colonies felt the necessity to separate from the powerful Kingdom of England and the King of England. He explained their inherent desire for liberty, freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he explained it in ways that were understandable to the people, to all of the people. A great deal of the reason for America's constant ability to self-improve is because we are able to reason, we're able to talk to each other, we're able to listen to each other, and we're able to analyze. We are able to apply our God-given common sense. So let's do it. Hello, this is Rudy Giuliani, and I'm back with Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. And today I have the great pleasure of interviewing Andrew McCarthy, former assistant U.S. attorney who prosecuted the Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman case, one of many, probably the most famous. And I remember early in his career he was part of the Pizza Connection case. And he has one of the most distinguished records of anyone in the United States Attorney's Office. And since then, he's become one of the principal writers, philosophers, thinkers. He works for the National Review. You see him on Fox all the time, and has written several books, and probably is one of the more sought after guests to comment on legal matters. He's just a great lawyer, has a great deal of common sense, which is why we have him on the show, and also very often has his own very unique take on things. He spent a lot of time in working in these areas that we're going to talk to him about. We're going to talk about the Flynn case, and we're going to talk to him about some of the legal ramifications of the shutdown. So, Andy, it's great to have you on.
Rudy, it's great to see you, and I appreciate you mentioning all those things. The proudest day is still the day you swore me in.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, you've done terrific. So, shall we start with Flynn?
Yes, sir.
I mean, aside from his lawyers, I don't know anyone that knows the case better than you. And can you take us? I mean, can you sort of summarize for us, because there's been so much confusion about how it started and what the problems are with it right now. I mean, everyone knows somehow he was charged with lying. He pled guilty to lying. There was a point at which the FBI thought he didn't lie. So his advocates say he pled guilty because he was forced to do it because of his son. And the people who are his adversaries say, well, he lied to the FBI, and therefore he's got to take his consequences.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to understand Flynn's case is to understand why I think they brought Flynn's case, which is that he was an obstacle to what the main objective of both the Obama administration working in conjunction with the FBI at the time was. And that was, once Mrs. Clinton lost to the president in the November election, the goal was to continue the investigation that the FBI called Crossfire Hurricane, which was really, I think, always trained on President Trump. And what they wanted to do was continue it despite the fact that he was president, which is a tough uphill battle, you would think, because the president, of course, has the ability to shut down investigations, including counterintelligence, which was the guise under which they were doing this.
When they began the investigation, the counterintelligence investigation, he was running for office.
Correct. Yes, they began it. I believe, Rudy, that the investigation probably goes back to 2015.
Wow.
And that the CIA and the intelligence community overseas, as opposed to the FBI domestically, were the main players at the beginning. I think the FBI got more active as you got deeper into 2016. They formally opened the investigation at the end of July of 2016, but I think there was a lot they were doing before that. And they opened an investigation they called Crossfire Hurricane,
which was a counterintelligence investigation.
Right.
Not a criminal investigation, which explain the difference.
Yep. The counterintelligence investigation is not done as a criminal investigation, is to vindicate the rule of law in court proceedings. It's done to collect foreign intelligence to support the president's mission to protect the United States against foreign threats to national security. And in order to use laws like FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which we now know they used in this investigation, you basically have to allege that the person you want to surveil or the group you want to surveil are conducting themselves as clandestine foreign agents or clandestine agents of a foreign power. So here, they had this Crossfire Hurricane is the overarching, or what they call the umbrella investigation, and it has a number of subset investigations to it, one of which was called Crossfire Razor, which was the investigation of General Flynn. And I would just conclude in a conclusory way say that there was no basis, in fact, to believe that Michael Flynn, who was a 33-year-old decorated combat commander of the United States, was a agent of the Kremlin, which is essentially what the allegation was. So that was his investigation was handled as part of this Crossfire Hurricane. And I think if Mrs. Clinton had won, the whole thing would have gone away and you'd never have heard another word about it. But once she lost, then they realized that two things. Number one,
now they is Comey struck. Who are the masterminds of this? Who are thinking it up?
It's the intelligence community hierarchy of the Obama administration and the Obama White House. So, for example, right in the middle of all this, on January 5th of 2017, which is the day before then President-elect Trump gets briefed on the Russia investigation, there is a meeting in the Oval Office between President Obama, Vice President Biden, and Susan Rice from the White House side, and Jim Comey, who was then the director of the FBI, and Sally Yates, who was the acting Attorney General of the United States. And I believe also in on that meeting were some of the other intelligence chiefs, but they did not stay for the follow-on meeting because that was limited to people who were going to continue on in the Trump administration, namely Comey and Yates.
So this was after he was president-elect. He was elected.
Correct. Right.
But before he took office.
Right.
So sometime in November?
No, this is January 5th. It's the day before.
Okay. This is a January 5th meeting. Okay.
Right. Day before Trump gets briefed on the Russia investigation, and right before they orchestrate what turns out to be the leak of the infamous Steele dossier. But in that meeting, what they talk about is holding back information about Russia from the incoming team. That was clearly a goal that they had. And I believe the reason that General Flynn needed to be removed as far as they were concerned is, unlike a number of the people who the new president brought in with him, Flynn was a veteran intelligence actor, an officer who had run the Defense Intelligence Agency and was a very savvy and experienced intelligence actor. There's no way they would have been able to keep from him the fact that both the Obama administration had investigated the Trump campaign, and unbelievably, they were continuing to investigate the Trump campaign and ultimately administration as the administration began. They were even then, Rudy, in the FISA court getting warrants. Right. And making representations to the FISA court that they believed there was a conspiracy of cooperation between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin.
This is after the famous intercept where doesn't Strzok say there's no there or
yes,
that they couldn't find anything.
Yeah, at a certain point they knew, and I think it's a certain point early on that they knew they did not have a case on President Trump, and they continued the FISA surveillance of Carter Page for almost a year, which allowed them to do a lot of collection of intelligence on people who were connected to the Trump campaign. But there was no there ever as far as showing a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and.
So they make a decision around January 5. We can't have Flynn around because if we do, we're not going to be able to continue this investigation.
I believe that's what happened. And it's ironic that it happens then, Rudy, because we now know that on January 4th, the day before, they actually closed the case on Flynn because they had nothing. But by a ministerial error, evidently, that Strzok ends up calling the FBI's utter incompetence, which he regards as serendipitous, they do not officially close the case in the system, even though they have a memo to the file that Comey has approved saying that they're closing the case on Flynn because basically they don't have any. It was ridiculous to ever think he was an agent of Russia to begin with. But they close that investigation, but they don't close it. And as a result, they
This is like the Keystone Cops if it wasn't so serious.
It's remarkable. But what they decide to do, I think, is a perjury trap. And they're led to that conclusion because they think of a few other alternatives that they might try, like doing a defensive briefing or using a defensive briefing as a pretext to get in and grill them. They have a bunch of proposals and they decide none of this is going to work. And what
they meaning
the agents,
McCabe, Strzok, Comey,
Lisa Page,
of course,
and Joe Pientka.
Okay, those are the main five people?
Right. So Comey has conceded that he, outside of protocol, decided to send two agents, Strzok and Pientka, to go interview Flynn on January 24th. And this is completely out of protocol because you're supposed to go to the Attorney General, who goes to the White House counsel, so that both the president's interest and the justice.
By this time, Flynn is now on the job.
Correct.
In an acting capacity, right?
The president, well, I think.
Or was he named?
He's White House staff. So
right, of course, yeah. Right, so he was just appointed by the president, straight up.
So the president's inaugurated on January 20th, and Flynn is interviewed on January 24th. And there's a weekend in between those two things where they talk about different plans for approaching Flynn. Ultimately, I think they settle on the perjury trap. And I think the idea of that was they needed to try to get Flynn to say something that wasn't true so that they could go to the White House and try to get him removed.
There's a quote from Page in one of the texts, I think, about get him off guard to get.
Yeah, well, that was about what were they going to advise him. You know, you and I know that when the FBI interviews somebody, even if it's like a drug dealer or a gangbanger or whoever it is, they always advise him of his rights up front. And they tell him, here's where you stand. They tell him, if you lie to us, we can prosecute you for that. They decide they're not going to tell Flynn any of that. And McCabe calls him before the two agents tootle over there and it basically discourages him from getting a lawyer or from letting Don McGahn, the White House counsel, or Reince Priebus, the White House chief of staff, know that they're coming. And they basically show up at his door, and Flynn agrees to speak to them.
And this all gets kind of described by Comey as he wouldn't have gotten away with this if it were a more mature or an older administration.
Yes, he knows that he's supposed to go to the Attorney General, who is supposed to go to the White House counsel to get all this approved before you just show up and talk to the president's staff. And the other thing, Rudy, I think that's crucial to realize that they did here was they actually have a recording of the conversation between Flynn and Ambassador Kislyak of Russia that they want to ask him about. Now, in a normal investigation, as we know, if you're really searching for the truth and you're trying to get to the bottom of something, you play the tape for the guy and then you ask him, what did this mean? What did that mean? They agree before they go in. They're not going to play the tape for him. They're just going to ask him about a conversation he had a month ago with Kislyak. This is a busy government official who's had hundreds of such conversations in the ensuing weeks, and they're basically going to hope that he trips up.
So this is sort of a credibility test. I mean, they walk in, they know you had the conversation, they got proof of the conversation, and they want to see, are you going to say yes or no?
Right. And they're going to hope that he lies, because then the controversy going on at the time was whether he mentioned sanctions in the conversation with Kislyak. And they have reason to know, because they have the recording, that he did, even though publicly he said he didn't. There's a variety of reasons that may have happened, but suffice it to say, they think they have him. And what they're hoping to do is that he'll basically lie about it. And they're also at that time talking about the preposterous possibility of indicting him for the Logan Act, which is a moribund, unconstitutional provision that the Justice Department hasn't even tried to use since 1852 and has never successfully prosecuted against anyone.
And he would have had the additional defense that he was the incoming national security advisor and therefore was gathering information to do his job rather than presently setting policy, thinking about setting policy in the future, which was only a month away or a couple of weeks away. It would have been a totally ridiculous prosecution.
Completely. And I don't think the Justice Department would ever have actually pulled the trigger and done it. But to make a long, sad story short, they basically, Flynn has the interview. The agents are not convinced that he lied. In fact, they think that he didn't lie to them. And they report that to their superiors, who reluctantly tell Congress that the reason they didn't charge him at the time was the agents who interviewed him didn't think he lied. And then flash forward.
And this includes Peter Strzok.
Yeah, Strzok
the
and
agents
Pientka,
are Strzok and Pientka.
They are the agents.
They come to the conclusion that he didn't lie, that it was a failure of recollection or confusion. And there is some confusion about was he discussing it with him, or was Kislyak discussing it with Flynn?
Right. Who raised it? How did it come up? And some other details about other conversations that they had. So basically, the agents don't think he lied. They not only tell that to their superiors, Comey and McCabe, tell it to Congress when they get asked about it. And what happens we go forward to May of 2017, the president fires Comey.
The president had fired Flynn basically because of what they said, lying to the vice president.
Yeah, I think Flynn conceded that. I don't know if either Flynn or the vice president would say that Flynn lied. I think what they would say is that he gave him inaccurate information, which embarrassed the vice president when he spoke about publicly.
Yes, right.
So Flynn's continuing, given the press frenzy that was going on at the time, was untenable that he would hang on any longer. The president dismisses him. And then if we flash forward to May, which is about 3 months later, the president fires Director Comey. The next day or the day after that, acting director Andy McCabe opens a criminal investigation on the president for obstruction of justice on the theory that a president firing the FBI director is obstruction.
This is the first criminal investigation, actually, right?
That's the first time they openly acknowledge
a criminal investigation of
yes.
the president. So the criminal investigation is the president exercising his authority to fire an FBI director. But he did it for a reason that they objected.
Correct.
And that's obstruction of justice.
Yeah, and because their theory is that the president is interfering with their Russia investigation. And they don't mention the inconvenience that because the Russia investigation is counterintelligence, it's actually done for the president. So it's not their investigation, it's the president's investigation that the president is allegedly obstructing. I mean, it's hard to explain this. It's so incoherent. But they opened that investigation. The next day, Comey leaks his memo to the Times of the meeting he had with President Trump about Flynn back in February. And that, of course, fuels the claim that there's an obstruction going on. And then the next day, Mueller is appointed. And I think Mueller was basically looking at this as an obstruction case from the start.
So the obstruction facts against Trump are that he fired Comey and the FBI director that he had a right to fire anytime he wanted. And he allegedly had this conversation with Comey 3 months earlier in which he told Comey to go easy on Flynn or be nice to Flynn or something like that, which Comey doesn't think is obstruction until he gets fired, because he never did anything about it. I mean, if you or I felt we were being obstructed, I mean, by anyone, you would report it right away, wouldn't you?
He would have been obliged to do it.
Right.
And he was asked, Rudy, about a week before he was fired, he gave congressional testimony
under
where
oath.
he was asked about whether he'd ever been pressured to bring a case for political reasons, and he said no, that hadn't happened.
So he wasn't obstructed for about 3 months, and then all of a sudden, after he was fired, he felt that he was obstructed.
Correct.
He got this sudden feeling that he was obstructed.
Yeah. Came on him like a wave.
Now, we should tell people that we both know him, right?
Yes, we know Jim for
I
many years.
have to plead guilty to hiring him, and in your case,
I had a very good relationship with
so
him
did I.
For a very long time. I haven't talked to him for many years, but I've always had a good relationship with him when we had a relationship.
So now after we get finished with all this, how does this become an indictment?
Yeah, this is amazing. So after Comey is fired, we should note for the benefit of all these FBI guys, they did a lot of things I think that were wrong to General Flynn, because this investigation should never have been investigated. But they never charged him. The whole time that Comey was running the FBI and McCabe was there and all these, Strzok, Page, the rest of them, they never charged General Flynn.
Yeah, and also, I guess we should make the point, which we both know, there's a very small group of FBI agents out of the total number of FBI agents. And they're kind of politicized FBI agents, wouldn't you say?
I sure think so.
When they're in Washington, unless you take steps to stop it, that's just going to happen. And I think it was the opposite here. I think these people, Strzok had been conducting political investigations for almost 2 years now. I mean, he did the crazy investigation on Hillary, and then he did the investigation on Trump that yielded nothing. So now he's doing yet another one.
Right, but he gets blown out of there in the summer of 2017. They remove him once they discover these text messages between him and Page. So this is a long-winded way of saying Flynn doesn't get charged until December 1st of 2017. And by the time, that's by Mueller's team, by the time that happens, all these other agents are out of there.
And who makes that decision Again, I don't think Mueller made the decision or was capable of it. Who makes the decision to fire him?
Well, Mueller's deputy is Andrew Weissman, and the prosecutor who handles Flynn's case is a guy named Brandon Van Grack.
So they make the decision to, all of a sudden, after the FBI agents who interviewed him had come to the conclusion that he wasn't lying, something happened that brought them to the conclusion that he must be lying.
Yeah, and I really think, Rudy, that if you look at what was going on at the time, once they took the case in May of 2017, I think they looked at it as an obstruction case. They're trying to make a case on Trump. And the two things that they really do are they try to squeeze Flynn and they squeeze Manafort. And they really play hardball with those two guys. We're now seeing some disclosures come out with respect to Flynn and his camp has said this all along, that he pled guilty because they threatened to prosecute his son for a violation of the Foreign Agent Registration Act.
Which is also rarely prosecuted.
Almost as rarely, up until recently, almost as rarely as the Logan Act. That's right. I think 6 times in half a century before Mueller came along.
So they basically bankrupted him at this. I mean, Flynn, when he makes the decision to plead guilty, basically can't afford a lawyer anymore.
Right.
As I understand it. His son is being threatened.
Right.
And maybe someday we'll find out what Weissman was doing, but I know for a fact that Weissman was mentally pretty close to torturing Manafort for a long period of time and has a history of doing this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they were pressuring him. They were pressuring him, and he pled guilty to end it.
Right. And then, so where we're at now is he's trying to get his guilty plea back, and his lawyer is trying to get the case dismissed on the grounds of outrageous government misconduct. A lot of that has to do with what appears to be lying and manipulation in connection with the 302, which is the report of the interview that they did with Flynn, which has some really funky aspects to it. And we'll have to see what the judge does.
And what do you think?
I think the judge will give General Flynn his plea back, which would put the ball in the Justice Department's court to say, do you dare come into federal court to try this case? He'll still, I guess, press the issue. As I understand it, by May 18th, all the papers have to be filed on the motion he's made to get the case thrown out on the grounds of outrageous government misconduct. But I'm not sure the Justice Department may not step up to the plate at a certain point and just say they don't want to go forward with this.
And just to complete the whole thing, Attorney General Barr has appointed, as he has done in a number of these situations, a U.S. attorney, a sitting U.S. attorney.
Correct.
And he's kind of like an independent counsel, or a special counsel.
A guy named Jeff Jensen. It looks like he appointed him probably early this year, 2020. He is the United States Attorney for St. Louis. I think that's the Eastern District of Missouri. And we'll see. He's the one who is probably responsible for the fact that we're now seeing a lot of disclosure that should have been made a long time ago that we hadn't seen up until now.
Well, that's about as good a description as I think anybody has had of the Flynn case. And it really is a disgraceful chapter. Whatever you think of whether Flynn lied or didn't lie, and whether it was a failure of recollection or a deliberate attempt to conceal something maybe he thought was embarrassing or harmful or whatever, what they did to him, they did a lot more plotting and planning and surreptitious behavior than he did.
Yeah, and we know on the basis of a lot of experience that even if you had a really terrible bad guy, whether it's a mafia guy or a terrorist, if you treated a guy like this, you would, as the prosecutor, you'd be fried.
Yeah, and I can't imagine in my experience in the Justice Department that anybody would do this. That you'd go kind of just test a guy's credibility. Maybe if you're going after John Gotti, even then I'm not sure you'd do it.
I just think a perjury trap's a tough thing to justify, particularly under these circumstances, and to do it in a way that you're hiding from the White House and the Justice Department that you want to go in to interview him is just inexplicable to me.
Well, I can tell you that's one of the reasons we didn't want the president to testify.
Right.
Not because we were afraid of what he was going to say, but we were afraid of what kind of tricks they're going to try to use. So I'm just going to ask you quickly, because we don't have much more time, about what is growing and growing and growing, which are the orders that were entered, these special emergency, let's call them dictates by governors, and also by the president originally, that you can't go out and you have to be 6 foot apart and you have to wear a mask and you can't go to church and you can't have a assembly to peacefully protest as the First Amendment guarantees. These are all things that are guaranteed in the First Amendment almost in exact language, right? The right of free exercise of religion, the right of assembly to petition your government, they're all suspended. Questionable where in the Constitution, what you say in your article is there's no pandemic exception to the Constitution.
Yeah, I wish I could say I came up with that myself, but that was the Attorney General Barr and the Civil Rights Division.
Well, it's excellent. There's no emergency exception. There's no exception. I have it here. There's no exception to the Constitution. There's no asterisk. There's no exception.
I'm glad you brought yours. I have mine here too.
It just says no law respecting, and then it goes on to mention all the rights. Okay, so sort of there's been sort of developed over the centuries, really, a sort of exceptional power that the president has. Like Abraham Lincoln exercised it and Roosevelt exercised it.
We had martial law in New Orleans in the War of 1812 toward the end of it, and it was Andrew Jackson was the general, and when a judge tried to issue an order on habeas corpus on someone he had locked up, he had the soldiers march the judge out of the city limits. So,
but now we're out of the emergency that whether it was exaggerated or not, and some of the numbers would suggest it is, but even the numbers that ended up being are pretty high. So you got a good argument on either side of whether it was justified at the time that it was done. Now, in many of these cases, the situation is flattened. The curve is flattened. The hospital systems are not overrun. That was one of the main reasons given in the first place, that it had to be done to save our hospital system from being overwhelmed. Well, there are empty beds now. So how can the governor of Virginia tell people they can't worship? And more than that, the case that you're specifically talking about, it was like 12 people in a 255-person church that were going to Palm Sunday services, and the minister has a criminal citation. Doesn't seem like in America.
No, it doesn't.
Seems like some other country. Poland maybe 30 years ago.
Yeah. The Justice Department says, and I think this is really hits the nail on the head. The question is not whether some, in this case, I'm adding this in. It's not whether some Democratic governor decides that your job is essential or not, or that your rights are essential or not. The burden is on the government to demonstrate that your job or your essential or your fundamental rights cannot be exercised in any safe way other than the way that they want to restrict you. And it is true that the president has these emergency powers. There's no doubt that preventing infectious disease, the Supreme Court has said since 1905 that that's an important government interest. But when you're dealing with fundamental rights, the government can only restrict them with the least restrictive means that will work, that will allow them to do the thing that they have to responsibly do. And the critical thing the Justice Department keeps saying, Rudy, is that you can't discriminate against a person's either religion or fundamental rights. In other words, if you allow drive-through commercial arrangements so that you could go to McDonald's to a drive-through to get a hamburger, you can't tell people they can't go to a drive-through religious service because you don't think it's essential. Or they can't go to a drive-through confession or drive-through blessing or drive-through prayer. Right. And the other thing the Justice Department says here is, look, if you're a business or a law firm, they're allowing you to operate. Your law firm can have meetings in your conference room where the people are a lot closer together than they are in that church. You can't say that the law firm can engage in its commercial activities, but that people can't go to church under circumstances where they're actually social distancing in a way that's safer than what goes on in our commercial arrangements. So they're saying you can't discriminate against people's fundamental rights.
Now, would that be any different? So we have the church situations, and then we have peaceful assembly, like the situation a weekend ago when a bunch of people were engaging in a peaceful protest. They seem like pretty normal people with American flags, and then you look a little further, and they have police officers in riot gear in California guarding the Newsom's mansion or maybe the State House. I can't remember. But that seems riot gear. I mean, what kind of picture is that? I mean, that looks like what the Chinese were doing in Hong Kong.
Well, as somebody who ran the largest city in America for a long time, you know, I think better than virtually anybody, that political legitimacy in a lot of ways of what you want to do is more important than the niceties of the law. And what I mean by that is, in a country of 330 million people, you can't enforce social distancing unless you get buy-in and cooperation from the public. We simply don't have the resources that we could possibly do it. And no one would want to live in a country that functions.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Because, there's that old distinction in the law about things that are intrinsically criminal, mala in se, and then mala prohibitum. So this is mala. It's not intrinsically wrong to shake hands with somebody, right? And it's not intrinsically wrong to say a prayer together with somebody. So now there's a reason, and it has to be dealt with delicately. And people are used to shaking hands. People are used to going to mass and church on Palm Sunday, and to start using criminal remedies for this, and to start using the police with riot gear to enforce it. So the NYPD union has said that it will not enforce social distancing, which that's a heck of a confrontation. The police won't do it. And there's a rationale they could develop for that, which is if it is unconstitutional for the mayor at this point to order it, because the emergency is not at that stage anymore, then it's unconstitutional for the police officer to do it.
Yep. And it's arbitrary.
And everybody took an oath.
Yep.
To the same Constitution.
I think the worst part of it is they are putting the police in situations where you're going to get the public to do the thing that in New York you tried so hard not to allow happen, which is that the police lose the influence and legitimacy and prestige that they have out on the street, which is essential to their ability to uphold the rule of law. And once you lose that, you have chaos. So I think a lot of these governments don't realize the fire they're playing with, but they're putting the police in a very bad position, I think.
Well, let's hope that the pushback through these court cases will kind of regulate this a bit, and also make certain it doesn't happen again too easily, because there is a slippery slope. We let this happen once, and everybody like sheep went into their house, didn't go to church, right? Didn't do the things we normally would do. We let it happen, but okay, enough's enough. And this is a place where these rights are guaranteed by God, not government. Or certainly beyond, if you don't believe in God, by nature. But they're beyond government. Government doesn't have a right to interfere with these.
Right. Our Constitution's there to preserve them.
Well, thank you, Andy. This was a really illuminating conversation, and I hope we can call on you in the future for going through these things, because I feel like in the next couple of months we're going to have a lot of this.
Thanks so much, Rudy. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Thank you very much. That was Andrew McCarthy, as we pointed out, a former assistant U.S. attorney, one of the better and one of the very best assistant U.S. attorneys that I work with a great career of prosecuting all kinds of crimes, in particular terrorism, and now one of our leading commentators and writers on legal issues that intersect with political and other issues. So I thank Andy very much for participating, and we'll be back shortly. Here where I live in New York City, you see people wearing these more and more as they commute. They're earbuds from Raycon. When commuting, you'll see them all over the city. But they're great to wear right now from home on video conference calls, or when you're exercising, or you're watching this video podcast, or if you want to listen to music. You just put them in, hit the music, and I'm listening to Bocelli Conte Partero. You can listen to your favorite music. Raycon earbuds are really comfortable to wear because they connect by Bluetooth seamlessly, and you're not having to untangle all these headphone wires. The first time you listen to your favorite music, whether it's opera or something else, you're going to be amazed at how good the sound comes from this little thing. What Raycon has done is truly amazing. You get 6 hours of playing time between charges. And when you pop them back into the box, it charges efficiently and very, very quickly. And they're not that expensive. You're going to save a lot of money on these. You buy these online by raycon.com/RudyG. That's raycon.com/RudyG. Get them now. You're going to really enjoy them. Thank you. Well, I think you all found that to be a very interesting interview of Andrew McCarthy. The Flynn case has been talked about now for several years. A lot of controversy about it, a lot of opinions about it, and I think Andrew, probably more than anyone, could put it in a simpler context than most. Let me see if I can just make it even simpler. Here's the problem with the case against Lieutenant General Flynn. First of all, it's premised on an interview done on January 24, 2017, merely 3 days after he assumed his role as National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. It was set up by the director of the FBI, Jim Comey, and it was set up for the purpose of trapping him. I don't think there's any doubt about it, of testing his credibility, because they were going to interview him about a tape recording they already had. They already knew from the tape recording that he had discussed sanctions with Kislyak, the ambassador from Russia, and they were going to ask him, did you or did you not have conversations about sanctions? And they had no intention of showing him the tape in order to refresh his recollection or find out what further information he would have about it, which is what you would do if you were seeking information. You would go and say, General, did you meet with him? Did you talk to Kislyak? And did you talk about sanctions? If the general says, no, I didn't, or I don't recall, you would play the tape for him and say, General, you did. So why did you do it? And give me more details about it. That's if you wanted to obtain information. Instead, Mr. Comey, Peter Strzok, an agent by the name of Joe Pienta, who accompanied Strzok, and I believe McCabe, who was the assistant director. I don't know if others were involved in that conversation. I think Lisa Page probably was. Came to the conclusion that they would sort of catch him off guard, would be a good way to put it, and not follow the procedures that they knew were the proper procedures to follow. So Comey knew that in order to do an interview with the White House staffer, and certainly of that level, but of any level, you had to go through the White House counsel's office so that the White House counsel could determine should the person be represented by counsel, shouldn't they? You had to have a discussion about that. Comey bypassed that procedure, knew it was wrong to do it because afterwards he bragged about it as if it was he said, and Comey said later that he knew he was supposed to do this, and if the administration had been in office a little bit longer, he probably would have been prohibited from doing it. But he knew that they would know, and therefore he could take advantage of them. And he laughed about it, and the whole audience laughed about how he violated these procedures that are intended to protect people's rights. I mean, rights are important, even for White House personnel, but they were treated with great disrespect, particularly with Comey laughing at them. But in any event, he calls. They set up the meeting with Flynn, and they tell him basically he doesn't need a lawyer. Certainly discourage him from having a lawyer, discourage him from telling the White House counsel about it. The two agents, Pienta and Strzok, come in and interview him. They have in their possession the tape recording of the conversation with Kislyak. They ask him about the conversation with Kislyak. In essence, in the answer, he says that he didn't discuss sanctions, and he didn't discuss sanctions with Kislyak. I didn't remember discussing sanctions with Kislyak. They leave the conversation. They go back to the FBI headquarters, and this is January 24th of 2017. And the two agents, conclude that Flynn wasn't lying. They conclude from basically an observation of his demeanor, which Comey goes to great lengths to explain when he testifies before Congress, kind of bragging about his expertise in being able to determine whether someone's telling the truth or not. That in assessing his demeanor, they had concluded that he wasn't lying, that he wasn't deliberately lying. So the case remains dormant. Subsequently, on May 5th, I believe, Comey is fired. Thereafter, a criminal investigation begins for the first time. McCabe starts it. And Flynn isn't prosecuted, a criminal investigation of then-President Trump for obstruction of justice in firing Comey. And all of a sudden it's revealed through a leak by Comey, which is a violation of rules and pretty close to a violation of the law. Comey leaks this memo in which he says that President Trump or President-elect Trump told him to go easy on Flynn. Actually, it would have been President Trump at that point, and that this is more or less evidence of an obstruction. Of course, it had happened way back in January, and for all those months, it wasn't an obstruction. He never raised it. He never told other agents about it. He never reported it. He never said or felt that he was obstructed. And all of a sudden, after he's fired, he suddenly feels he's obstructed. And McCabe seizes on that as another thing to investigate for corruption. But still, it has no effect on the Flynn case. Last thing we heard of Flynn was the agents didn't think he was lying. And all of a sudden, in December of 2017, they prosecute him for lying.